9-year-old Charlotte Sena, Sena. Miracle. Really, that's the big headline for me. Charlotte Sena, this gorgeous little 9-year-old girl, is camping with her mom and dad and family and friends at an upstate New York campground, Lake Moreau State Park. And I've got to tell you, when she went missing, it sent chills down my spine because the scenario was one I have lived out many, many times. You guys know I love to camp. I love the outdoors. We camp, we fish, we RV. And we recently took the children from Atlanta all the way out to the Grand Tetons and stopped everywhere in between. Every RV park, we had John David's bike, sometimes strapped to the RV and sometimes in the RV with us, crammed between the seats. Every RV park, he would get his bike out and go round and around and around the RV park. And I would get out because, I didn't know any of the RV people there. Never seen them before, and I'll never see them again. And I'm sure they were all wonderful, but I didn't know who they were. So I would get out and try to jog behind him. Of course, he would get away from me, and then he'd kind of like loop back around. Charlotte had been riding her bike with her little friends, again, 9 years old, and she said, I'm just going to take one more loop. It was about a third of a mile, and 15 minutes later, they knew Charlotte was gone. They then found her bike that had been abandoned in the middle of the road, a highway, down a grassy hill and through the trees, and her helmet gone. Miracle, Charlotte Sena was found alive, stuffed into a cabinet of a camper of a man who had set up the camper behind his mother's home. His name, Craig Nelson Ross Jr. Joining me right now, a name you know well, all of you legal eagles and crime sleuths, Chris McDonough, director of the Cold Case Foundation, former homicide detective, has investigated over 300 homicide scenes. You can find him at coldcasefoundation.org. Now, I found him at the genesis of the Brian Kohberger investigation, where the University of Idaho students were slaughtered, some believe, in their own beds. And I found Chris in the interview room because he, and I think his wife, were in a car and they drove very slowly all through the area. And it was, as you might imagine, San Francisco with the hills and the turnarounds and the hairpin curves and the houses right on the street where you could barely imagine two cars getting through. And of course, there was snow, so much thick ice and snow. And he got in his car, and either he or his wife set up a cam, and he would talk as the car drove very slowly, and he'd go, okay, now we're taking a left turn onto King Road, and he'd point out everything. I felt like I was there. And that sufficed until I could get on a plane and get out there and see it for myself. And that is how I found Chris McDonough. Chris, thank you for being with us from the interview room. I know you're in the middle of teaching a whole, classroom full of investigators and detectives right now in connecting cases, and that's what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about Craig Nelson Ross Jr. and what you think about this case and his potential links to 3 other cases, 2 cold cases and another little girl that about a year ago, age 12, claimed he assaulted her, and that case was dropped. Analyze.
Nancy, number one, thank you always for inviting me. I'm so grateful. And you and I have been in this business for quite some time from the field to the courtroom. And I think this particular case with Mr. Ross and, of course, with Charlotte being recovered I mean, what a miracle, number one, that she was recovered.
PTL,
And,
Chris. Praise the Lord.
amen. Seriously, I mean, there was definitely divine intervention there. Because statistically, you and I both know that statistically within 3 hours of an abduction, there's a high probability that the life of that child starts to go in the opposite direction of hope. And so what we need to
right
look
there,
at in
why
these
is
other...
that? Is it because, I mean, of course, I'm not a shrink. I'm just a trial lawyer, and we're talking about stranger on stranger abductions, not, parents are having a custody fight and mommy runs off with the baby. Not that. Stranger on stranger, which this is. I think that as an armchair shrink, that the perp sees the child as a sex object, not as a child. And then after the attack on the child, that child is nothing but evidence that has to be gotten rid of.
That is exactly 1,000% correct. And so
is that a thing? 1,000%? Not 100.
Be today.
Not 200, but 1,000% correct. Okay, good. Okay.
You are 1,000%, Nancy, on that one as others. But in this particular situation, what we have to take into consideration, number one, that day, and what I think a lot of folks forget is this individual had gone into this problem with this idea of, okay, I have a plan here, and I'm going to execute this plan.
He did have a plan, Chris. He did, because that's played out by the facts. Because she was with the other 2 or 3 other little girls, I think, and they were going round and round. The one time she goes around by herself on 1/3 of a mile in a circle, she gets snatched. So he had to be lying in wait, as I say, like a jackal, for the right moment to snag her as his prey and put her in a car, because, Chris McDonough, the dogs couldn't pick up a scent, which means she was put in a car right there. She wasn't taken off into the woods. She didn't go wander to a lake and fall in. They lost the scent right there where the bite was.
Yes, and so that tells us a tremendous amount from an investigative analysis place, right? Where investigators, when these things first happen, you really have to make a tremendous amount of decisions quickly. So in this case, like you just said, you've got the bicycle there, the dog scent disappears at the bicycle. So obviously the first thing that comes into play, which came into play, is there an automobile involved here? Is there something, is there a mode of transport? And if so, that tells us the familiarity in relationship to the suspect possibly, i.e. he or she at that time, which it's a he today, Mr. Ross. Everybody needs to be within a 5-mile geographic, maybe even 15-mile geographic region, taken a look at, and then you start to extend out. And in this case, it was a little bit further out. And then what the investigators did in this particular problem, and then we can go back to the first question that you asked in the beginning about the other girl, is you have to create like an L, and it's called a victim continuum.
Oh, wait, now hold on. I'm going to
Yes.
have to start taking notes. For a moment ago, I thought, do I need to write that down? Now I know I should have been writing notes. Victim, what, continuum?
It's called the victim risk continuum.
Okay.
VRC.
Victim risk, now I get it. Hey, I just wanted to tell you, the other little girl was 12 and reportedly was related to him, to Craig Nelson Ross Jr. in some way. Don't know how. Could have been a niece, could have been a cousin, could have been, I don't know what. I know she's 12. And somehow, by blood or by marriage, or as I like to say, by divorce, you get related to all sorts of people, and somehow she was related to him. We're understanding, which is a whole nother can of worms. But still, young girl, 12 years old. That's all I need to know. Go ahead.
Yep. And so with this victim risk continuum, what you do is you make a vertical line on the left side and then a horizontal line on the bottom. And on the left side, you put environment, situation, circumstance. And on the right side, on the bottom, on the vertical line or horizontal line, you go high or low, medium, high risk. And the behavior of the victim will tell us a lot about the perpetrator. And here's an example. So in this particular case, the environment is this park, the environment, situation, the circumstance. She's riding her bicycle in this park, supervised by her parents. So then investigators go to the bottom and they say, is that a low, medium, or high risk activity?
I would put that as low. Only because, Chris, that's within eyesight. If you look at the layout, there are campers around, it looks to be like a grassy area, and then with the loop around that. So you can see her as she goes around. Everybody was out there. It was still daylight, grilling out, and all the children out there playing together. Now, if my daughter went on a walk, and she was going to go on an hour walk, I would put that as medium risk because it's a neighborhood, a suburban area, low crime, which doesn't always mean anything, but big factor, she would be out of my eyesight. I couldn't see her. That's like letting your child go to the mall. And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying if I'm going to rate it low, medium, high, I would have put Charlotte in low risk because that's within eyesight of the parents. And of course, letting your child walk around, a fair or a busy, congested area where there are thousands and thousands of people, that would be high risk. Like, let's just pretend I let my daughter walk from, 15th and 3rd in New York, all the way up to Central Park, around the park and back. Very high risk.
And there would be some variance and factors that would, kind of move that variance towards the high risk even and back and forth. And that would, of course, be, the time of day, the crimes, environment, et cetera, et cetera. So, but with children, and in this situation here, so you have a child who says, "Mommy, I want to go around one more time like a big girl around the park." Okay? And prior to that, she was with a group of children. So from the perspective of this continuum for law enforcement, if everything is on the left side, i.e. in a low risk, okay, there is a higher probability the suspect has seen the child in a previous type of crossing at some sort. Okay? If it's a high risk scenario, i.e., the child is riding their bicycle home from school on a deserted country road, nobody knows where the child is, et cetera, but that the child's coming home, that means there's a higher probability a total stranger is a victim of opportunity. So the lower risk would tell us a stranger and or somebody has come into the environment of that child in the past, i.e. that person has either seen, heard, or read something about that child. And
you're so right. You're so right, because now we are learning, you're hearing Chris McDonough from the Cold Case Foundation. We now know that this guy, Craig Nelson Ross Jr., had a house in his name 1/8 of a mile from Charlotte's family home. In that neighborhood, Lake Monroe State Park, maybe 30 minutes away. So he was familiar with her neighborhood, and many have wondered, had she ever seen him in the neighborhood, just standing around or walking around. And I believe his children, or some of them did, his adult children, live in that house, and he has moved into a camper behind his mother's house. So long story short, we also know that Charlotte's grandfather had a horrible sledding accident, like a snow sled, and got about a $2 million settlement out of that, and it was in the newspaper. We also know that this idiot, and I feel okay saying that about Craig Nelson Ross Jr., took a ransom note. What did he want? $50,000? Is that what he wanted? He wanted 50 grand, and he put it in the Senna family mailbox at about 4:20 a.m. I guess thinking, hey, the grandfather got that settlement. Now they can get the money and give it to me, and they'll get their daughter back. I mean, so yes, he had to have been stalking her in order to snatch her at that precise moment. There's no way he was just driving by and in that 1 minute saw there's a little girl. He was watching her. Now we know he's got a neighborhood connection and probably knows about that money settlement. Was this a money motive? But let me just throw a wrench in the works. When cops got there and they find Charlotte crammed into a cabinet in a camper, she's about 5 feet tall, crammed into a cabinet. You ever been in a camper? The cabinets are like this big. He had on his underwear. I don't even want to think about that, but was there a sex motive as well? I don't know. Okay, jump back in.
Definitely indicator towards that, and that is a huge red flag, as you have pointed out, Nancy. And so in this particular situation, so if we think about what the cops were thinking that moment, as they circled up, as you know, what we used to call it, right? Everybody get in a circle and we discuss, okay, what do we have here? The first conversations that take place is this victim risk continuum conversation. And everybody looks around and says, okay, what's our environment, situation, circumstance? And they measure it quickly, hopefully, within, because you really are running against the clock. You have about 3 hours statistically, as we've mentioned. So in this case, they're probably thinking, okay, well, we've got all of this stuff coming here. So do we A, put an Amber Alert out right away, or B, do we put a missing child alert out right away? Because all the indications are somebody in the environment around this family and or potentially the community knows who this kid is, knows who this child is. So
right.
That, in my opinion, that's why it took a day.
So you thought at the beginning it was a local. I did too, but I didn't know why. You just laid it out to me why. Hey, can I ask you about Jennifer Hammond and Christina White? Jennifer Hammond, 18, Christina White, 19. If you look at their pictures, particularly Jennifer Hammond, but actually also Christina White. Jennifer Hammond has the same coloring as Charlotte Sena. Christina White has a lot of the same facial features. I see the similarity, and just for instance, look at Ted Bundy's victims. So many of them were pale, white, petite victims, dark hair parted in the middle, long. If you look at Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer, and I believe the Butcher of Manorville, a lot of his victims were very petite, tiny women. A lot of them look similar in build as well. So very often you see a connection in the way the victims look, the way they appear physically, or where the perp finds the victims, like in Long Island serial killer, he found them all online, or found a lot of them online. Here, the 12-year-old little relative was in the neighborhood, we think. Charlotte Sena was in the neighborhood, and these two were in the neighborhood. Either that neighborhood or his mother's neighborhood. See what I mean? The MO, the finding the victim, the physical appearance of the victim, the manner of approaching the victim. If it's similar, then we may have a serial predator here. I don't know that there's a connection yet. That's why I want to talk to you about it.
Definitely the similarities in relationship to, how they look, right? That always, yes. That always applies towards, the fantasy base of an individual selecting what we call, and more than anybody as well, it's called victimology, right? And so there's a whole process that investigators go through to say, okay, do they look alike? Do they, are they the same age? And this is why it's critical then to go back to that the victim risk continuum, Nancy, because now we have to ask ourselves, what was the 12-year-old doing that day? What was the, I think they're 16 or 19, 18 and 19?
One 18, one 19.
Okay, so what was the 18-year-old doing that day, and what was the 19-year-old doing when she disappeared? So yes, there could be some similar threads through all three or all four of the cases, but now we have to really say, okay, where is an investigator going to go?
Wait a minute.
Yep.
I actually think it was Jennifer Hammond. She's the one selling the magazines. Door to door, yes, at that time people still did that. And she was dropped off at a trailer park.
Yep. High risk, low risk, right?
And as you know, he had a high risk. You're meeting one stranger after the next. His mom had a trailer, and he was living in a camper, and this girl goes missing selling magazines in a trailer park near where they lived. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's one.
So,
her body was found dumped in rural Greenfields, New York, not too far by.
And so you and I both agree that is a high risk activity just to start randomly.
Oh, I got to tell you
knocking on
something
doors.
else. Another similarity.
Yep.
Her remains, her skull was found near Lake Desolation Road. Remember, Charlotte goes missing at Lake Moreau State Park, and this woman, this young teen's skull found near Lake Desolation Road.
Okay, so we've got this situation now. Let's take this young victim who was knocking on doors. And so that's a very high risk. So she, as you and I agree, she swings way over to the right because now that opens her up to anything possible out there. And so that means, registered sex offenders. That means, just criminals that have been out of prison or jail, recently. And the list just goes on and on. You put these guys away
Chris.
for many years. Yep.
Both of the victims, Jennifer Hammond and Christina White, both vanished near trailer parks, both found in the deep woods of upstate New York, which is where Lake Moreau campground is.
And that's important. That's huge information to know. And so the thing I would want to know is because, I would want to sit down with Mr. Ross and say, tell me about your habit patterns. Tell me about what you do when you wake up. Tell me about how you drive. Why do you go to these particular areas? And that's what we call a suspect, suspectology is what it's called. We want to know intimate details about that individual. And I call this, as I'm teaching this class here, intimacy. I want them to see into that individual's life, that suspect's life, right down to how do you tie your doggone shoes in the morning, okay? Because that behavior, okay, and how they do that has been learned, and that learning behavior can give us a predictive analysis as to what the next possibilities could be. Do we eliminate him? Do we keep him in the circle? Do we take him out of the circle? Do we just put him over here on the side? Okay? And in these types of cases like this, where you have two similar body dumps, two children, God bless their families, and
two teens,
so sad.
One 12-year-old, and now Charlotte.
Yep.
Still trying to determine if he's connected to the two teens. Don't know that yet. And their bodies were skeletonized, so we're not going to get any DNA. But we may get something else, maybe some DNA on their clothing if there was any clothing left.
Yes, but we have two projections of motive here, right? He's standing there in his own underwear with the 9-year-old and sending a note simultaneously about, hey, I need all this money. So I would submit at this time as well, I would take the other two cases, the 18 and the 19-year-old, and just kind of say, you know what, I cannot say definitively right now if this guy's involved. However, we need to go back and take a look at when he was 27. I think he's 47 now. So this was 20 years ago on the first one.
Yes.
And then 2 years after that.
What do you make of it being 20 years ago? Do you think that has any impact? Because I don't.
Well, it does actually, Nancy. I think it does.
Disagree, because I had a guy named Walter Gates.
Mm-hmm.
He was in his 60s when I prosecuted him for double child molestation on a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old girl. And I looked back, he had been beating and raping his extended relatives. He had, I forgot how many, 20 plus natural children, he said on the stand on cross-examination. A lot of those were girls, and that's who he would rape. I found his adult victims. He had been raping and sodomizing his own daughters and stepdaughters for 30 years. So it didn't matter.
Right. No, but this is where we're going here with that thought process. Is you have this guy who's in his 20s, and you have to say to yourself, okay, if he's killed both of these victims in his 20s, that means you got to go back another 10 years before that, when he was 17, and look at his development in relationship to criminal activity, because that criminal activity pushed forward to where he made a decision to kill his first victim.
So what do you make of the financial motive? I mean, it's real. There's some reports that he may have made Charlotte herself write the ransom note, but that does not mean he didn't have an initial sexual motive. Because if the little 12-year-old girl's telling the truth, he's not getting a ransom out of her. So if that was a sex-related attack, now he's got a 9-year-old in his grips. I mean, it's sex-related.
It is. And, well, it could be, yes. High probability. I'm going to go with a 90% right now that's the motive here for him, but not necessarily discounting the fact that he's also not the sharpest tool in the shed by putting that note into the mailbox at 2 o'clock in the morning.
4:20.
Or 4 o'clock in the morning. 4:20 in the morning, and saying, hey, I need your money here.
And leaving his fingerprint on it.
Yeah. Don't you love America? I mean,
I do.
You know,
I
these
do
guys,
love America.
These guys are not, you know, they're job security, but it's sad because
apparently, according to a girlfriend, this guy had never worked a lick in his life. He did not want to work. Yeah. He mooched off everybody around him. This is from his ex-girlfriend. So maybe he's smarter than we're giving him credit for, because you and I get up at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning and start working. Not him. Okay, so who's smart?
Nope.
We'll see. You're hearing the voice of my colleague, my friend Chris McDonough. You can find him on YouTube on the Interview Room. Chris, we will wait and see as the case unfolds. Goodbye, friend. Guys, thank you for watching Crime Online with Nancy Grace here on YouTube. To get the very latest, subscribe to Crime Online here